God is good. God is love. God is not wanting to anyone to miss out on their future, their inheritance, their relationship with him. And he's going to keep going until they eventually succumb and give up fighting and arguing, you know, with him and resisting love. Because at the end of the day, you can't be separated from love. Nothing can separate us from the love of God.
This is sort of an odd thing. I don't know how familiar you are with the World Economic Forum, if you've heard of them.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Well, I was listening to a little clip not from Klaus Schwab. He's sort of creepy enough when he talks, in the sense of like by 2030 you'll own nothing and like it,
Right, yeah.
which is like, yeah, right. But he's got this other guy who I guess like you would call his sidekick, and I just heard some clips from him yesterday talking about, well, look, we don't have to, essentially saying we don't have to depend on God. You no longer have to do this. There is no such thing as a spirit or a soul. You don't even have freedom of choice. Now, this is the World Economic Forum is a lot of the world's very wealthiest people who meet to form policy. And that's why I was wondering, listening to that, and these are all people that have really serious money behind them. The funniest thing is they're all about climate change, but they all fly in private jets and live on big houses with large carbon footprints and they don't drive electric cars. They drive big gas guzzling cars, but they're all about climate change. Right. But to sit there and think that it's just a little creepy hearing something like that, because these people are being given real credence, like they really have something to say.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't worry too much about it, because ultimately I think people will realize that there's hypocrisy in what they're saying. As you've just said, people aren't stupid. They're looking like, okay. And I also feel people are awakening to the reality that none of these financial things and all of these things that people say, they don't amount to anything in the end. And I think people are beginning to get a bit smarter, which I think is why there's a lot of protests. People are saying, "I've had enough of this now, it doesn't work." And I think as people awaken to love, they'll realize the things that aren't love will be accentuated in one sense. Things will become more clearer when certain things are revealed, and then other things will be put into the perspective of love. So I was blessed really that there is an awakening happening. I love the fact that old Creflo Dollar came out and said that tithing was an old covenant thing. I thought, awesome. We're under grace, not the law. And I think I heard that someone from his teaching, I think maybe in someone in this group said that he was teaching people about inner relationship with God and intimacy, which I think is a real positive thing. So for me, that was just a sign that people are beginning to awaken. I think who's the other guy down in Florida? Benny Hinn also came out not that long ago and renounced prosperity gospel teaching and stuff, and just said, it's just false. It's just not truth. And so
how old is Benny now?
Yeah, I don't know.
He's a little bit older than me.
Probably. Yeah. Don't know.
We met him way back before he was ever a big name, and he was just a skinny little guy.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen him in a long time.
But I think people are beginning to wake up, and those people are willing to come out and say, hey, this is not what it's about. For me, that's a real positive sign. I love I also saw this amazing testimony of a guy who started the South African Satanic Church, who had this encounter with unconditional love. It was an amazing story. It's like he told this amazing testimony that he was on a South African, I think Cape Town radio show, and he basically said that he didn't believe in Jesus and didn't believe Jesus existed, and he was trying to bait people. And after he finished the interview, so a lady came up to him and just really hugged him, and he said he'd just never felt love come from anyone like that before, and he was like, it was said it was powerful. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know who she was. She didn't say anything. A couple of weeks later, he finds out that she's a Christian saw her on some WhatsApp thing or something, and it's like, then it really confused him because he had been rejected by Christians, as you can imagine, being part of the Satanic Church or founder of the Satanic Church, and was so challenged by how could someone like that hug him and not call him out, that it sort of made him become aware, open, I think. And then he said he was doing some sort of ritual to try and find out about getting more power. And Jesus appeared to him in this ritual, and he called Jesus out. If you're Jesus, you need to prove yourself. So Jesus just fills him with unconditional love and totally breaks the guy open. And it's an amazing story. This guy's in tears now telling this story. And he just goes on to say, he just experienced unconditional love and grace. That was, he just kept saying it. He says, I'm not here to, be negative about those people that were broken like me, in that old thing. And I know people aren't going to accept me in church because, I'm gay. So I know I'm not going to be accepted in church, but I've had conversations with God now that I've got 800 pages of handwritten notes of things God's talked to me about. So I'm like, hey, that's it, And I was talking to a friend yesterday in South Africa, and he said, yeah, awesome, wasn't it? But then he sent me this little post of someone saying, yes, but don't be deceived. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't repent. He didn't mention this. And it's just like, yeah, here we go. There's the religious reaction. There's the ones who basically, why would he want to be sorry when he's just discovered unconditional love?
You mean because he didn't go through the steps of the Roman road?
Yeah.
It doesn't count.
He didn't do the 4 spiritual laws. He didn't follow the evangelical pattern, and therefore he must be deceived, and he's out to deceive everybody. There was more truth came from that guy in this interview in 10, 15 minutes than I've heard from a lot of people for a long time, because he'd experienced God and was continuing to experience God. The sad thing was the most Christians had treated him in such a way that he rejected Jesus. Because he was broken, and he knew he was looking for something, but he didn't find it in Christians, probably because he was gay and probably because he was a bit weird, and essentially they rejected him. So he looked for something else, which is sad, and he wasn't angry. He wasn't knocking any of them. He basically was saying, hey, this woman showed more love to me than anybody ever, just with a hug of acceptance. I mean, it was just like, that's the power of unconditional love. I was so blessed and thrilled to see it. And he posted this video of why he had resigned from the board of the Satanic Church and was no longer a member. And and they posted it on their website, on the Satanic Church website. They posted this testimony of this guy engaging unconditional love in God, which is so powerful. I just thought, hey, God's got such a sense of humor, But it was just highlighted that I'm rejoicing over this guy's testimony and weeping with him. And then you got the religious, fundamentalist. Well, he's not really repented. He hadn't talked about sin. Why would you want to be sin conscious when you've just been embraced unconditional love? Because love keeps no record of wrongs. Why do they want him to focus on his past when I'm sure God's talking to him about his future? It's just like so religious, isn't it? It's just so negative. And you always find so many people like that who just, if it's not their way, it's wrong, And so sad, really. But I guess
I just recently finished a book, and it was written by a guy who was like, when he was 54 years old, suffered a major heart attack and was actually dead for 20 minutes. And part of the result of that I never really considered is that when someone is out that long, they brought him back. He's still alive, but he suffered a traumatic brain injury because of the brain being deprived of oxygen. And so part of the testimony was talking about not just getting over the physical heart attack, but trying to train his brain for as much as it is able to retain. But one of the things he talked about, and I think he was Catholic, because he talked about, they would go to church, but I don't know how much of a believer he was. But he said that when he died, everybody wanted to know, well, did you see the light? And he said, no, there wasn't any light. In fact, he said he was in total darkness. And he was really, when he finally came out of the coma and everything, he said he had absolutely no idea what was going on. And he wasn't able to hear what was going on around him. But he said he was in the most indescribable peace. He said, I can't even give you words. He goes, I can't tell you what this peace was like. And he said, I have no fear of death. He said, because I know what that peace is. But he said that part of, his recovery process, he said it's almost like there's two voices in his head. There was the atheist who said, well, you died, but you didn't see anything. And his father died when he was very young. And he said, I would have loved to have seen Jesus and just to be able to ask him about my dad. He said, I had so many questions that I would have loved to have answered, but Jesus didn't show up. So there was part of him that was grappling with the, well, yeah, you would die, but you didn't see Jesus, so he doesn't exist. But the end of it comes down to, he said, even though sometimes he grapples with that, he said, I purposely choose Jesus. Even though I didn't see him and I didn't have the experience, that everybody who normally dies gets. I didn't get that. But the fact that he said that there was just this peace, that he said, I cannot put it into words. I can't tell you what it was like. He said, it was so marvelous and so wonderful and so beyond anything he'd ever experienced. He said, I have no fear of death, not at all. So it was just really neat to see a guy who's very honestly saying, hey, I didn't have the after death experience that everybody else talks about. No, I didn't see the light. No, I didn't see Jesus. In fact, sometimes he said, he goes, hey, look, I can be somewhat of a snarky guy. He goes, I told people, yeah, I went to hell. I saw so-and-so there. And then he would tell them, no, I'm only joking.
Yeah.
But the fact that he said that even though he didn't see what he really wanted to, when it came to either not believing or believing, he stood firmly on the thing, I believe in Jesus.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, he experienced what he needed to experience. And at the end of the day, God knew he was coming back. So it's like, so he experienced something that was relatable to him, which is the important thing. And I think, yes, there are some similarities in, NDEs and all of that, but they're not all the same. Yeah. And I think there's a sense where God knows exactly what someone needs to affirm, and perfect love has cast out that fear. He's now got no fear of death. Yeah. So it did its job. Whatever happened to him actually confirmed and was an source of encouragement. Yeah. Not the opposite. And I just feel, hey, God knows what he's doing.
Oh, yeah. And being that he talked about that because of the neurological impairment, he can meet you for the first time and hear your name, and within 5 seconds, forget it. And unless he repeats your name back to you over and over and over and over again, which he said probably annoys people, but that's the only way he can train his brain to retain it. And he said, he has no memory of anything. He could have been having the most incredible experience that his spirit will remember, but because mentally, because of the damage, he has no recollection of, but he does remember the peace.
Yeah. And that's the emotional feeling, which goes beyond just brain consciousness. Because that has gone deeper into his subconscious, I guess, and he still knows that feeling, because that feeling was probably stronger than anything else, and that's the thing that stuck there, which is awesome. But I think some people have different experiences in these things. I've no doubt that Jesus meets everybody on their actual point of death, because he does know. So it's, in one sense, it's like there's no point visiting someone on their deathbed if they're not going to die in that way, because because they're going to have a continued life. But I believe Jesus visits everybody on their point of death, and a lot of people do accept him at that point. Some people don't. Those are the people then who have to go on into a further process of refinement and purification to get them to the point where they will accept him. But God is good. God is love. God is not wanting to anyone to miss out on their future, their inheritance, their relationship with him. And he's going to keep going until they eventually succumb and give up fighting and arguing, with him and resisting love. Because at the end of the day, you can't be separated from love. You know, it's like nothing can separate us from the love of God. You know, people might not know it yet, but nothing can separate them from the love of God, because God is love and he's a work in everybody. So they can't be separated from him. They might resist it, but you know, they can't be separated. And I think it's only the realization, and that's what we need. We need people to come to that realization, like Paul did on the Damascus Road, and the light came around him and revealed that God was in him, working in him. Jesus was in him, working. You know, that turned the lights on. Then it's like, who are you? You know, Jesus, and you've been resisting me. You know, now you're illuminated and enlightened. I've got this mission for you, this heavenly mission for you to go and do the same. Take this message that I'm working in everybody of inclusion effectively out to the Gentiles, to the world, you know, which obviously what he did. Yeah, and that's the message we need to carry. God loves you. He's accepted you. You're just not aware of it. Meet him. You know, that message is so much better than, you know, God doesn't love you because you're not good enough, and you need to make yourself good enough until he does. You know, it's like, yeah, you know, which is really what, you know, those people who are criticizing this guy were saying. You don't fit into our idea of what God's like and what he does because you haven't repented. You know, well, he totally has repented. He's changed his mind completely, radically, had a complete change of mind and renewal of his mind towards God. That's what it really is. Did he need to feel sorry? When he's rejoicing for having unconditional love, you don't think about being sorry for the past. There's no need to, because there's no record of wrongs kept with God. Why would we want to make sure people focus on their record of their wrongs? Because that's what religion does. You know. Anyway, there we go.
Yeah, that's so. Yeah, just kind of the story you told, Mike, about that Satanist is just so remarkable, and I think you know, just so powerful. I just triggered a memory that, you know, before COVID, my husband and I were in a Barnes and Noble's bookstore looking at some book on the shelf, and we were approached by this fellow who was really into the dark arts in a major way, and we engaged him in conversation and just kept loving on him, you know, and it was just amazing. By the end of this conversation, we ended up I gave him a big hug, and I could watch his reaction. He just was stunned by the love of God. And I know he was touched. I just know he was deeply affected by it. I don't think he changed his viewpoints on any number of topics, but he left that encounter, I know, in many respects, deeply, deeply touched by the love of God. And I really believe that that's the transformation that has to happen. And even though Christians may not seal the deal, so to speak, I think God is clearly at work in people. They just need to know, you know, the Father's love for them. And that can be so revolutionary. But anyway, I had a question for you, Mike. I thought this is interesting. I stumbled upon something. I thought this might be an interesting topic for conversation. As you probably already know, there's a deliverance minister, you know, who works with a lot of SRA survivors, who somewhat recently posted some online videos on Kabbalah with a warning, essentially, to the Christian mystic camp to steer clear of Kabbalic influence. And, you know, he even highlighted, for example, a Christian conference that was named Zohar Illuminated. And among some of the topics that he went to, he explored, you know, I've only watched, I think, 2 videos.
Yeah, it was about 12 or 15 or something.
Yeah, he talked about Metatron. I was like, oh, what does he have to say about Metatron? And he got into the sacred geometry of Metatron's cube and Merkaba mysticism. And, you know, he, you know, highlighted how the cube forms part of the Kabbalah tree of life, you know, with its Sephiro. And he said the Kabbalah tree, now this was interesting. He said the Kabbalah tree was used essentially as a template, like an overlay for rituals performed, by Satanists on satanic ritual abuse survivors that he has ministered to. And he went into the story of how he had been working with these SRAs, and he wasn't able to get a freedom for them until he realized what was going on. And then, through a series of prayers, he was able to get a breakthrough. So my question, given the warning, I'm just wondering, could there be some, is some way in which some of the mystics may have gone too far? What, essentially with regards to influences from Kabbalah, which I know, there's been Kabbalic influence on Christianity going back certainly from the time of Pico della Mirandola in the 15th century, and if not even earlier in the Middle Ages. So I'm just wondering, what your take is, on all of this.
I agree with him in majority of things he's saying, in that Kabbalah is totally antichrist.
Yes.
Their cosmology is not Jesus is the creator of the world as the word of God. It's not. And although there is some things which has similarities, or there may be some things in there which have a measure of truth because it's true, that doesn't make Kabbalah true. And I would not be encouraging anyone seeking after intimacy with God to try and find it through Kabbalah. I believe it's a deception, and I believe it's totally anti-Christian, anti-Christ, and I wouldn't have anything to do with it personally. Now, that being said, Metatron's cube, sacred geometry, there is a real and true, which has been counterfeited and used by those who follow Kabbalah and the dark arts, or whatever you want to call them, which doesn't make the original encounter wrong. I mean, I encountered Metatron's cube in heaven. I encountered the Merkaba within me without any connection to Kabbalah or any Jewish mysticism whatsoever, or any other form of mysticism. I engaged it with God, and I engaged it with a group of people who were seeking God at the time, and we all saw this cube thing and Metatron's cube and the shape, and it was like, what is that? Why are we seeing all this? No idea. But God showed us it, and then God unveiled the behind it and this whole Merkaba and the tree of life stuff. What we've got to be careful of is we don't throw out the truth because it's associated with a wrong perspective, and I think Kabbalah is that. There are maybe some people who have the wisdom to be able to look at some of that and find some truth, but why would you want to find it in a book which is primarily not true? That's my, for me, it's like, I'm never going to read it. It's like, I don't need to read it, but I have experiences of things that are, I think, true, but are not counterfeited, and they are counterfeited in that system. So all of the tree of life thing and the Sephiroth and all that stuff, there is a truth to it, but it isn't the truth that you'll find there. I would, with the guy who basically put those videos out, he has thrown everything out because he's not been able to discern, because he's not had the experiences of it himself. That's the difference with me. I would say I've encountered Metatron's cube, I've encountered Metatron, but he's not the Metatron of Kabbalah or the Metatron of New Age or anything else. He's the angel that I met as a being that God introduced me to at one stage. So for me, the personal experience gives you a balance of what is truth, but also enables you to discern that which isn't true. I would never be encouraging anyone to try and find the truth in a book which is primarily a lie. Mm-hmm. That's not to say that there could be some truth in it, but why would you find it there when you can go to Jesus and get the truth as he reveals it?
So one of the thoughts that came to mind is this conference. I don't want to mention the person's name.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I in my next book, which hopefully will be out in September, this is with the publishers right now, I do a whole chapter on Kabbalah and its dangers and the whole influence on the Christian movement of the Zohar and all of that stuff. And there are a whole load of people out there who are very well known who are teaching it but they're also making a lot of money out of it as well, because they're encouraging people they need to learn Hebrew to have a deep relationship with God. And therefore they're offering Hebrew courses. It's just like, no, you don't. God speaks to me in English. God isn't Hebrew either. It's like, he's God. he's actually no of any human descent in that sense. So we've sort of got to be careful we just don't get sucked into another system of mediation, which is what it is. And I've got good friends who are into some of this stuff, but what's behind it for me is, in the Hebrew roots movement, is going back under the law, because the whole foundation of that movement is to get you back under the law. Well, we're not under the law, we're in grace, and I'm never going to go back under the law. It's like Paul said to the Galatians, "Well, you foolish Galatians, you started out in grace and now you're going back under the law. You're never going to keep it." They couldn't keep it. No one could keep it. And most of the world weren't under it anyway. Why do you want to bring the whole world back under a system which failed? Because Jesus fulfilled the fullness of all the promises of God, and therefore the law and the prophets and everything which was in there. Jesus is the truth that gives it its true perspective. And therefore we're not under that system of having to follow a set of rules or laws or any other things for our relationship with God. And I think ultimately those people who are following Hebrew roots in whatever form are on a slippery slope down towards deception, which will lead people back under the law, Noahide laws and other things, which really is trying to get people to follow a Luciferian agenda, not a kingdom agenda. And sadly, people don't seem to be able to discern it. And I've heard all of the things. Oh, well, yeah, we should be following the festivals and this stuff. It's like, didn't Paul tell us we weren't under any obligation to follow new moons and festivals and whatever? It's like Jesus has fulfilled all the festivals. He is the fulfillment of every Jewish festival. And I'm sure that there's good teaching that you can get that actually shows you that Jesus is a fulfillment of those things. But actually, I'm just not that interested. I used to be. Years ago, I would have understood, gone into the teaching of all the festivals and all that stuff, because that was part of my upbringing in that sort of system. But now I realize that there's no need. I can engage with Jesus personally as the truth, and he can reveal what is true to me. I don't need to try and follow, in a sense, Jewish dates, celebrate Rosh Hashanah or any of the other festivals, including Passover. It's like, didn't Jesus introduce a totally different meal, which is eating his flesh and drinking his blood in the new covenant, not the old one? Yeah, they're all pointers, they're types and shadows that were pointing to Jesus. Well, Jesus is here. Why would we want to go back to a type or shadow when we have the fullness of the truth that Jesus revealed himself as? It's going backwards, and it's deceptively bringing people back under bondage as far as I'm concerned. So I would really not encourage anyone to get into any of that personally. If God tells you to do something, well, of course you do whatever God says, and I've got friends, Justin and people like that, who, they're wise enough to discern some things, and that's the way they operate. For me, I don't need the mysticism of a book. And I know Nancy read the Kabbalah and all sorts of stuff, and she was probably wise enough to be able to see some of what she's seen in heaven and discern it. But there's also a way that it can deceive you. And I think the Hebrew root stuff and all of that is a deception, which we don't need to be under that. Why would we want to go back under something that we've been set free from any obligation to any religious laws or things, whether you're, come from a Muslim background or a Hindu background? You wouldn't want to be sort of celebrating Jesus in Muslim, in that thing. Now, will Jesus meet you there? Absolutely. People are having dreams and visions of Jesus within those religious systems, and they're receiving revelation and coming free. And he may have a whole load of people who are still in those systems waiting for the right moment to reveal Jesus in them, but they're not following that religion anymore. I don't think we should be going back following any religion either. Therefore, let's make sure we just keep with the mystic reality of relationship with God without mediation. It's like, do I believe in the living letters? Yes, because I've met some of them. But God doesn't speak to me through Hebrew letters. He speaks to me directly in English. Are they maybe the fabric of creation in some way? Probably so. But I'm engaging with creation in my sonship, not through another mediation system. So I think care is needed, and we need discernment, and we need to be careful. We just don't go with something because of the name of the person who is promoting it. Because I've promoted things which aren't true. I thought they were true when I promoted them in the last 10 years. Now I know they're not true, and I don't promote them anymore. And I don't teach that anymore because now I've got revelation of something different. So I'm sure they're not meaning to lead people astray or whatever else, but that doesn't mean that they won't. So discernment is the key. Hang out with Jesus, the truth, that will enable you to discern that which isn't true. That's the easiest way. Always go through Jesus, the truth. Then you're not going to get deceived. And you may well be able to discern that which is and which isn't. Trouble is the terminology is the same. The name Metatron is the same. The being is not the same in those systems. And you get that when you sort of have met him. You realize this is not the same being. It may have the same name. It's not the same being. And that's where we've got to be careful that people using terminology which has similar words can be completely opposite. And of course, a whole load of New Age stuff and that uses similar terminology, ascending onto mystical planes and all this stuff, astral projection and all those sort of things. And it's like, they're counterfeit, but that doesn't mean there isn't a truth, because we can travel in the spirit. We can be in the spirit. We can go into different realms, because we've done it. But that doesn't mean that the terminology means the same experience. So be wise, I think, be discerning, and don't be gullible and accept everything on face value. Check it out.
Thanks, Mike.
But somewhat the guy who put out the series on the Kabbalah, or the warning of the Kabbalah, sometimes gets quite overexcited and quite
he's colorful
in his way of presenting, and it's like that's not always the best way to help people when you can be quite vocal and can appear to be very negative. And I know you're trying to warn people, but you can warn people without being negative to other people. And I think we've got to realize everyone's on a journey, and I'm not going to be critical of where those people are on the journey, but I'm also not going to embrace what they're teaching or promote it. But I would promote other things they teach because I believe they're truth, and we've got to be discerning. Otherwise, we'll reject truth because of some error, which is not good. But we need to be able to, chew the grapes and spit out the pips, and be more discerning about things, not just accepting everything because of who said it, which is why generally I'll say, don't believe something just because I've said it. Go back to the Father with it. Check it out. Get your own revelation of it. Otherwise, you just got information. A lot of people just receive other people's information. It never becomes their revelation, really, unless they experience it themselves. So I think that's the key. Engage God with it themselves. And don't buy into everything, because it's definitely, it's an agenda. And I think it's part of a bigger agenda to get people back under a system that looking to control the world, and it isn't the kingdom of God. But they're quite happy to use religion in its various guises to do it. And they've hoodwinked a whole load of Christians into promoting what they're doing, which I would not be in favor of personally. So, yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay. But an interesting topic, and one which I think may well provoke some more conversation from people once they become more aware. And I'm hoping that just like Creflo Dollar has come out and renounced tithing, some of the mystic community will come out and renounce some of the stuff that they've also been teaching as well, realizing that they have been deceived. Okay, anyone else got anything they want to talk about?
While we are still, or you just dealt with that, for me, the biggest reason to not emphasize Hebrew roots kinds of things as a posture is that that true light has now shined. The light of the Son of God, and analogous to the brightness of the noonday sun out, which will be out in a few hours where I'm at. You know, to try to go back to types and shadows and all kinds of messianic terminology and Hebrew roots kinds of expressions would be like going outside in the brightness of the light of the noonday sun with flashlights. Really. Oh, and in fact, I've got a big spotlight, you know, in light of the noonday sun. Are we really receiving more light? Are we adding anything?
Yeah.
And so when you can come into the direct, personal, intimate relationship with God, with Christ in you, with the love of God, my goodness, anything else is really going back to lower and lesser.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really good analogy, actually. I like that. And it is like that, isn't it? I mean, that's the measure. But it's like the Galatians did. They were manipulated. It happens. And I think that's the danger when you see people who have had amazing experiences and yet still can be deceived into going back into lesser light, or thinking this is going to illuminate something more than Jesus. I mean, how can it possibly? You know, when, as you say, he is the light, you know, the light of the world, and he wants to reflect that from us so we can be seen as reflecting that light. You know, actually, you know, doing that is not such a good idea. And I feel, you know, moved to write a chapter in a book about it, because I felt God really say this is a danger. And, you know, deception is always trying to get everything that God has revealed and twist it in some way or lessen it in some way by getting you to go back into some formula or something. Like all these denominations, they started out with truth. They started out with revelation given them to them by God, but they enshrined it in a rigid format that then becomes law and bondage. You know, and I think there's a danger that will happen if people aren't careful.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm Jewish, and so what in that sense? Back in the day now, when I was in classical Pentecost, oh, a Jewish believer, wonderful, they have more revelation. And so people wanted me to come and share, which I did, Hebrew roots kinds of things, whether it was the actual Jewish Seder meal with a church or that kind of thing, and all of the projections of Christ in the Passover, the matzah, and the lamb and the blood on the doorpost dust. And then, of course, showing that Jesus fulfilled that. Well, you know, my heart was not trying to get them back into legalism or the law. It was really just, that's what they wanted. Yeah. And, you know, but I think part of it was people who did not and have not still come to the light of the glory of God in the fullness and brilliance of the light and love of God in Jesus Christ, and still seeing the dark God, the God of terror, the God of persecution, the God of the horrific teaching of hell, etc. So they're grasping for straws. Oh, look, there's wonderful pictures of Jesus. And so I can understand that. But now for we, again, who have come into the light, and particularly have mystical encounters, etc., to go back and try to highlight and project. And, you know, I'm sure, like you were saying, a lot of it is done in sincerity. but I trust God will help us to see more and more really that the light, the love has now come, and we want to go higher and not backwards.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's absolutely true. Yeah.
I keep thinking my own experience here. I noticed over the years from the time I was young, I was planting certain Jewish people in my life. So he's given me a really kind of special, tender heart towards Jewish people. And it was building from the time I was young, but I didn't have too many contacts until later in life. But I did eventually, when I moved to the East Coast, I joined a Messianic synagogue for a couple of years. And it was spirit-filled. They were immersed in the Toronto blessing. There was a lot of good things going on there. But there was also a control spirit that I was kind of the new kid on the block, just learning a few things about the prophetic. And I ended up getting these incredible, I'll just say, revelations that I didn't understand, that I ended up bringing to the leadership, hoping that they would be able to help me to understand what I was receiving. And all the time they started reacting to it. And so before I knew it, I was really the subject of some spiritual abuse.
Yeah.
So that was my reason initially for leaving that congregation. But I also recognized, I mean, they were very open about a lot of things and not really, so dogmatic. But there were a couple of things that they were very dogmatic about, and then when you ultimately leave and you look back, I kind of believe it's true that there is a little bit of a slippery slope. Yet at the same time, I realize that there are a lot of, Jewish people that is a way for them to kind of make a gentle step towards Jesus, because it's a familiar system for them and it becomes a very necessary part of their development. Yet at the same time, you can find yourself, as you mentioned, Mike, kind of going deeper into areas where it does become much more restrictive. So I think it's complicated, I think, for people. But at the same time, there is, a lot of freedom in Christ, and that is the ultimate goal. And so I see that perspective as well. But, I've been kind of blessed over the years. I'm even connected. I don't know how God signed me up for this, but it was amazing. I'm part of this group with the American Jewish Committee, with a bunch of Christians, are in dialogue with Jewish people. We're always praying for them, that they will come to know Yeshua as their savior, but we've had this dialogue going for 15 years, and it's just been the most amazing thing. I've come into contact with people that have been in presidential administrations. I mean, they're very, very erudite Jews in this group. And then you have very ordinary Christians, who are just not on the same intellectual level as many of these people by far. Yet the bonds of love have been amazing. And even one of the leaders on the Jewish side, who I'm not going to mention the name, but he's emeritus now, but he was basically the head of radiology at, I won't mention the university, but a very powerful university near where I live. He once remarked that it would be the love of the Christians that would lead us to becoming believers in Jesus. It was the most remarkable expression I think I heard in that whole time, but I could watch their hearts melt. Sometimes the veil starts to go down that covers their eyes, and yet not long after it quickly goes back up. But we keep praying for them. The dialogue has been really great, and some of them I think are very deeply touched. But I just keep thinking, there is this, framework, that is very restrictive for them. And, hopefully at some point, the veil will come down. We keep praying for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the danger in it is the mixture of covenants and mixing old and new together. And that just brings a dilution and a bondage. And I think I've no problem with all sorts of different steps to maturity that people need to go through. And it may be that some of these steps are helpful to people who come out of a system of belief and find Jesus, and this is quite familiar to them. But ultimately, you don't want to get stuck and then stuck under a system which is not going to let you come into freedom, because you're again going to be in the bondage of law in one way or another. That being said, I think the key is there, what you're saying is through Jesus. There are some Christians who don't believe that Jewish people need to come to Jesus, to God through Jesus. They think they had this whole, I guess, teaching, which basically is almost like, well, no, they're God's people, so they're going to come through a different way. And it's just like, that is not going to be helpful to them saying, well, you're going to come through your own religious way because, well, you're God's people. At the end of the day, the only people who were ever of God were those who came to God in relationship. Ultimately, Paul made it clear, not all Israel was Israel. Those really were those of faith. And that was old covenant faith. They, because they needed faith in God, because they never met him, did they? I mean, they definitely needed faith to believe in a God that they'd actually sort of said, well, we set up this system to keep us separated from him because we're afraid of him, literally. I mean, that's basically what it was all about. They weren't prepared to go up the mountain, so they sent a mediator. Now, we've got to get them to see that it's open access and don't have to come through any religious system, which is love is going to do it. Ultimately, only love is going to break down any, whether someone's a Jew or a Muslim, a Hindu, or any other version of religious teaching that they're in. Love is the way that will break down those barriers, and therefore not trying to tell them they're wrong or win an argument against their faith or their beliefs, because that's not the way we're going to win people over. It's not an intellectual argument that Christianity is right and Islam is wrong, or Hinduism or Judaism is wrong. That's just not the issue. The issue is introducing them to the love of God. That will change their whole thinking. We'll never change their thinking through winning an argument, because we'll just lose friends. We'll lose the relationship if we're trying to prove them wrong all the time and tell them they're wrong. Helping them find and discover the light and the truth and love by loving them unconditionally is the key. And I know some people find it really hard to love people who have different beliefs unconditionally, because we've been conditioned into, well, we can only really be in relationship with those who believe the same. And actually, that's not true. I mean, it's just as well that God has a relationship with all of us, and we don't believe everything that he believes yet, but it didn't stop him having a relationship with us, because we're on a journey. And I think if we treat people in all religions as on a journey towards eventually finding God through Jesus, whichever way that takes place, and that can happen in many different ways, then we're not going to be trying to be critical of their religion, but trying to introduce them to love. That will be the encounter that will change their lives. And then we leave it up to God, what he does with them. Let's not try and condition them into something else then of following Christianity, when we want them to follow Jesus or follow the light and follow God as Father. So it's quite an important area, I think, in terms of how we share the good news, how we are good news, how a hug can change someone's life. How you hugging that person may not have had a completely successful outcome from an evangelical perspective because you didn't close the deal, but actually you have impacted that man's life. And whether he has other encounters or God meets with him and reveals, he will remember that. And that will be something significant on his journey. And I think that's the important thing. You know, it is a journey, and there may be many steps for some people to come to a realization of the truth. Loving people is going to be the best way of getting them there.
Yeah, amen to that.
You know, and to be honest, it's like Christians can't even love each other. They'll love someone with another religion because they are only going to love people who are actually believe the same. Because there's so many Christians think other Christians aren't really even Christians because they don't believe in baptism, or they don't believe in this or that or the other. It's like, hey, come on. All those denominations really are just a sign of our lack of love and acceptance and relationship, not of, you know. And actually Jesus didn't say, you know, oh, it's all your knowledge and wonderful theology that will let the world know you're my disciples. He said it's your love for one another. Well, it's no wonder the world is not really seeing that we are followers of Jesus, because of the way we treated each other and still do treat each other, you know. And I think that's the key. I think let's make sure it's love. Love is the answer, you know, to whatever the question is. Love's the answer, you know. And I do feel that is beginning to awaken, and more people are beginning to come to that realization, which, you know, is powerful, really. Okay, anybody else? Catherine sent me a link to the NASA Webb telescope pictures, which are just live pictures of all the things they're releasing from this telescope. Are such amazingly beautiful pictures of the cosmos and the nebulas. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, just so very. I mean, I look at it and think, God, you are just so beyond. You know, it's just like you. I mean, how could you dream up all this stuff? You know, how could you have so much ability to create? I'm looking at thinking, it's like, how much would we run out of ideas after, you know, the third or fourth galaxy that we've created or something? And you just look out there and think, look at all this amazing things, part of the cosmos and this wonderful manifold, multifaceted God who has this ability to think, and yet we're made in his image, you know. So I love the fact that people have, you know, invented telescopes like that can actually take pictures of it. It's just awesome, you know, just to rejoice at it. I look at it. Sometimes I'm moved with tears just in how good God is and how wonderful he is. And sometimes I'm just like, wow, there's so much to be thankful for and grateful for, and so much more that we don't know yet that we're going to discover and enter into. It's just beautiful. So thank you, Catherine, for sending that to me. I have it on a loop, or just have it playing live on my one of my other screens all the time. I just look and think, wow, look at that. That's just amazing, you know.
Will we get one of them as your background screen?
Well, this one's the cosmic reef, this one behind me, which is quite a number of light years away, thousands of light years. But again, you know, it's a beautiful picture, and it spoke to me, and I engaged it and found truth and revelation in engaging the portal there, and, you know, connecting to what was behind it. And it was just, you know, again, I was drawn to it immediately. I saw it. You know, normally I have the, you know, the sort of moving version of it. I think I obviously put it on there because Jeremy complained that, you know, he can never get a screenshot of something because it's always moving in the background. But I do like them.
Is this from an actual NASA website?
Oh yeah, that one is, yeah, and the video of it as well. It's a video of, you know, the pictures they took. But the other one, the one that's currently this is the Hubble telescope. This one is this James Webb telescope or something. But it is just so good. I've got so many pictures of these things. It's just so beautiful, and they're adding pictures all the time. And they're so colorful and so amazing. So,
and then you think of in all the cosmos, and there's just one planet where people live that is perfect. The perfect environment, everything close enough to the sun, that perfect distance, the perfect atmosphere, the right mix of oxygen and hydrogen and everything. Only one.
Yeah, that's good. But I do think we will be able to go out and colonize some more and make them more aligned to a garden environment and a beautiful environment. But yeah, and I think that sort of shows how important the understanding of our sonship is. Because our sonship is so key to creation and its freedom and bringing everything back into a restored state. It's just so important that we discover who we really are, and we're never going to discover who we are unless we discover who he really is, because that's where our identity is from. So it is beautiful. I love it. I must admit.
I posted the link on the chat.
Yeah, there you go. And it's great. I'm just looking now. It's just like, wow. And there are just so many amazing pictures. Just amazing. It's awesome.
So,
yeah.
So, Mike, as related to what Mary just said,
yeah,
I don't know. So I'm not saying she's wrong, but I think I've heard you allude to the same kind of thing, essentially, that as far as our universe, we're the only inhabited planet. Why would we think that?
Why would I think it? Because I've had conversations with God about it. I'm not saying that there aren't other beings. I'm not saying some of the other beings have not come through other constellational portals in the cosmos. I'm just saying they're dimensional and not actually of this physical universe as we know it. Because I believe that was our role as sonships, to populate this universe with increasing government and peace. So, when you talk about UFOs and aliens and all this sort of stuff, yeah, anything that's not of this planet is an alien. I just don't think they were actually formed on a planet in this universe, but in other dimensions. That's my experience. I've been to a lot of these portals out in the cosmos, out in the different constellations, and there are beings that are infiltrated there, but they weren't originally from there. And though I know a lot of people say, oh, there's beings coming from Sirius and all this sort of stuff, and there's Michael Tellinger's sort of ancient alien stuff, I don't believe that they are actual beings from another planet. The Watcher angels who did come to Earth, and they did trade for human DNA with knowledge, different things. They were angels. They were aliens. They're not human, and they weren't created on this planet. So they're aliens in one sense, but they're not. They're of a spiritual dimension that can take physical form. I don't believe that they're from another planet or something.
So the dimensional beings that have infiltrated and been on other planets, that kind of thing, are you saying none of them have actually populated these other planets and stayed on them?
I don't know. What I've seen is some staging posts or places for an extension into our dimension, which is not for good. That's the thing. They don't have good intentions, and what they have done when they've come through different gateways to affect our planet has not been good. And I think all the abduction stories, I'm not saying all of them are true necessarily, but there are some that are true without a doubt. And I think that is again a desire for other beings influenced by Lucifer, effectively, who wants to control sonship. And he wants an inheritance as sons, and therefore genetically try to create hybridized beings that would have an inheritance as sons. Well, they don't, and that goes back obviously to Genesis 6, and it's happened a number of times where there has been external influence tried to influence the cultures of the earth. Sumerian culture received external influence. Other cultures had visitation, let's say, from an external sources. I don't believe that they're, my personal opinion. I may be wrong, and I'm not hard and fast about it. I've just had no personal experience. The experience I do have is of dimensional beings that have accessed through portals in certain constellations that have some nefarious goals that we're shielding the earth from. That's what the earth shield was primarily originally about, to ensure that they would not have negative influence on the earth in the process of the enlightenment that God was bringing about on the earth. And it's quite difficult because they are beings, and they are beings that have various forms, and it's like, does it really matter? Well, I guess not really, in one sense. Does it matter where they come from? Well, the purpose is where they're going to end up, and how can we help them be restored and help them back to their original purpose. And I do believe that the dimensions were created for us to bring about the influence of sonship that would reveal their identity and purpose. And I don't think they have an identity and purpose independent of us and our relationship, which is why they've taken their purpose from us. And they've taken it from the Tower of Babel, and they all have Tower of Babels on their planets, and it's difficult to say planet because I can't say I've seen it as a planet, but in their societies, whichever way their dimensions work. And I'm not saying there are universes in their dimensions. That's not what I've seen. What I've seen is societies who were procreated societies, not created societies like angels. Angels are created in orders, and all individually in orders of function. These dimensions are procreating. They are beings that have started somewhere, but I do believe our sonship was part of their progression into knowing their identity, because it's linked to ours, but it's been linked to the worst of ours, and therefore those societies are horrendous, the ones I've been to, and desperately need truth and love to bring about the true sense of what sonship will do in restoring them to their proper identity and purpose. Hence, they are connected to 12 ages of man, and therefore operate, some of them in a highly more advanced stage, because time does not operate the same within dimensions, it's relative. And therefore there are some dimensions that are operating in ages of man that we're not yet there yet, that are living in the influence of that, because time functions differently. It's weird stuff. And there are wheels within wheels, and the 12 ambassadors of the ages that are connected to all this, which, I've not sort of delved into much recently. So I've been focusing on other stuff. So.
Well, I've heard you speak before of beings that you've met that were not fallen. I also had an encounter some time ago, and I was seeing all these worlds and beings and just beyond, and it was like God was laughing at me, and he said something like, "Oh, you sons of God think you're the only good thing that I've got going for me." And so, are you saying, though, as far as sons, you don't think there are actually sons beyond just we that are part of this planet?
Yeah, I mean, it depends really on how broad a term that is. Does anyone have DNA made in the image of God like us? No, I don't think so. But that doesn't mean that they're not children of God, and they're not created by God, and God, and has a purpose for them, and a relationship for them, and relationship with us in union and oneness of all creation. So I wouldn't want to hard and fast define. The beings that I've seen that weren't fallen had a very clear desire to help us help the beings that had fallen. So they certainly, whatever their source of the fact they didn't fall, they had knowledge that was not fallen, if you like. Now, I don't know, and I don't know enough about them, and I haven't had enough contact with them, because doesn't seem to be something that at the moment I'm focused on to give you any more details on it. But they were very helpful, and they also had been reaching out to me, because in the encounter I became aware that their frequency was familiar. And I think Nancy would actually said, they visited you in dreams. And I'm like, yeah, something is familiar with them. So there was some point where there was an intersection or a contact there that could become helpful for future missions or whatever. But I don't know enough about it to give you real absolute details. But they were good, you know, and they, because they hadn't fallen, and they seemed to have a sense of purpose connected to us. They wanted to help and serve us in what we were doing, which I think, and I'm not talking about servitude, but cooperation. You know, it's a cooperation with them. We're not the master race, you know. It's like, yeah, we are here to represent unconditional love and to bring people into that revelation as well. You know, I'm not there to dominate the universe. I'm not going to go planting flags on all the planets and start claiming ownership and mineral rights or whatever. You know, that's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil stuff. You know, we really don't want that. But there is so much more, you know, I think, that is becoming unveiled and revealed. And, you know, the experiences you had, you know, find out more about it. Let me know what you find out, you know, because, you know, there's way more than I know, or probably I'm designed to know in one sense, you know, but learning from other people is all part of the journey. You know, that we want people to go further than we have, and we want to learn from those who've gone in different directions than we have, because then we don't have to go and do it all ourselves, which is, you know, I think part of the fact that we're all needing each other, which is great. Anyway, I need to leave it there. So thank you for participating. It's been great. Lots of good questions.